The Outlast Trials is a multiplayer first-person horror game where you and your friends perform trials for the shady Murkoff Coporation. Currently it's available in early access on Steam. Atmosphere. Outlast Trials' main theme is excess in nearly every aspect of the game. The trial areas themselves are seemingly constructed for the purpose of testing, and they feel far detached from any real place. Many of them feel like a parody of what they're meant to represent, an over-the-top, oversaturated version of a carnival or a boarding school. The buildings themselves are normal, but dressed with corpses and mannequins, propaganda posters and graffiti over every wall, decay and detritus everywhere. It's impossible to look in any direction without seeing something vandalized, destroyed, or amped up to increase shock value, or to be deliberately creepy.
Wakey, wakey, my little angels.
But it has the opposite effect. It's almost cartoonish, to the point that the atmosphere of vile depravity just fades into the background because it's trying so hard to be hardcore that it itself becomes a parody of a snuff film that you spent 40 minutes in. When something is genuinely atmospheric or spooky, you don't have enough time to appreciate it because of the number of enemies in the area. The night vision helps some areas become almost eerie, but it's not really enough to build an atmosphere effectively. And there are points where the atmosphere does very subtly creep in, but it's rare and undermined quite quickly. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. Due to the lack of atmosphere, the game takes another hit in this regard. Many environmental scares that take place during the game, from random pictures falling off the wall to light bulbs bursting or even enemies jumping out of lockers at the player, are at the most briefly startling, and at worst they're weird if you stop to look at them at all. The main antagonists are like the rest of the game, over the top, with the cop who gropes himself and electrocutes his leg with a shock pattern as his introduction, to the woman who holds a puppet with a drill in its mouth and talks in 2 different voices and she hunts you. The entire game is spent with the player being hunted as they perform tasks, and there's a myriad of enemies that come and go in and out of areas to impede your progress. In single player, due to the looping areas and abundant places to hide, it's not much of a challenge to shake enemies that are pursuing you, but in multiplayer it was far more difficult because we tended to lead enemies back to one another. The enemies themselves are mostly just annoyances. Their threats and menace is kind of neutered by how easy they are to escape or mess with. Closing a door in an antagonist's face was almost comical how it continued to work, even on the main enemy of that trial. The game did use some interesting tricks in multiplayer, like spawning an identical clone of your friend that would stab you in the stomach, which was unsettling and unexpected. It made multiplayer more tense, and its addition was genuinely brilliant. The game also uses sanity effects, which are pretty interesting in the way they warp the environment, but it brings about an imaginary enemy that drains your health as it walks towards you, which is the most unsettling thing in the game. It moves unnaturally and comes and goes instantly. Whilst it's easy to restore sanity, running around without the items you need to restore it while suffering from psychosis is as close to scary as the game gets. Again, Outlast Trials' obsession with upping the ante has left it feeling like a caricature of its origins. That's still no Harry Masons.
Down this way.
Healthy respect for authority is key to productive healing.
Sound design. The game's music is a large step down from previous games and lacks depth. It's mostly just a swirling ambiance of gentle, unsettling drones, and thanks to how often you enter and leave chase sequences, it's cut off frequently to enter the chase music, which repeats a lot. It would have been nice to have some more variety in the music. What is here doesn't do much to help the environments, except for the carnival, with the jovial carnival music really helping make the specific areas of that map feel unhinged rather than oversaturated. The sound effects are brilliant and realistic. The overall quality of the sound space and reverb is superb. The directional audio was really spot on as well. However, the dialogue for the antagonists is straight up laughable, with the cop being by far the worst I've ever heard. None of it felt menacing, it just felt embarrassing or caused us to laugh as he deliberately said the most offensive things he was allowed to say.
If you ain't guilty, then why are you running? You smoke. You're gonna pay this back in spades. Hey!
The more generic enemies fared better for lines, with some of them actually feeling more appropriate in the way they sounded and the lines delivered, with many of them having vast repertoires of lines for all the scenarios available, which was pretty impressive. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. The gore in Outlast Trials is again over the top, but it's not as needless and immersion breaking as it was in Outlast 2. There's still an overwhelming number of gory things, but in the game's environments and context, the gore just fits in. It's a trial and a lot of people have died doing it, especially taking into consideration the number of murderers they throw at you. The most memorable parts see the player shoving their hand into a corpse's stomach to try and fish out a key, and using a bandsaw to remove someone's legs as part of a trial. The gore that Outlast Trials uses in its actual gameplay is really unpleasant, as it should be. It gives weight to the nastiness of the trials. That's 2 Harry Masons. Story. The game's opening cutscene implies that you're homeless and join the trials just to make money or make something of yourself. But you're taken in by the Murkoff Corporation and drugged as someone else who was taken at the same time is beaten to death in the barbaric initiation treatments. The game goes into a lot of the same tropes as the previous games, with many references to things like MK Ultra and other brainwashing conspiracies. There's a great deal of paranoia in the story, with goals to remove propaganda posters and things like that. And whilst it feels like you're being brainwashed as you do the trials themselves, at the moment there's no overarching story or plot, which for a game with a multiplayer focus isn't too bad. It feels like there's enough lore without really presenting anything, which is enough to fuel the things that happen around you without ever needing to explain anything, making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Outlast Trials is a very hit and miss experience. In single player it's very easy even with no upgrades, because the antagonists are still susceptible to the same things that befell enemies in the previous games. The environmental design is brilliant, but it's over the top to the point of being a parody. It doesn't manage to scare or even creep out the vast majority of its gameplay. It's almost an assault on the senses in some places. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I was bombarded by brainwashing, I did not give in and advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.